entering court, Trump, again, saying the case and the trial are politically motivated and unfair. He also accused the attorney general of being a, quote, political operative. Paul Henderson is a San Francisco attorney and the executive director of the city's Department of Police Accountability. I want to welcome you back to Scripps News Live and start with Eric Trump, saying that former President Trump was fired up, ready to testify. Trump has already been in that courtroom on a voluntary basis. He's been watching the proceedings. As a veteran prosecutor, Paul, what opportunity does Trump's testimony present for the prosecution?
Well, there's a lot of testimony here that is really important because the stakes are very high. Now, remember, he won't go to jail from this case either way, but it would be a huge blow to him and his corporation. And more importantly, there will be cross-pollination from his answers into the other lawsuits and indictments that he's facing. So all of that is at stake, and his testimony is going to be crucial in seeding opportunities in those other cases, and in this case in particular. One of the things that really stands out to me in this case is that he is testifying and making these long speeches. That's why the judge keeps telling him to answer the questions, but the questions themselves have some legal outcomes in determining what's going to happen to him in the future. That's why you hear him saying when he gets pressed over and over, oh, on that specific part, I don't remember. Now, that's going to be relevant because in this case, what they're unpacking are a number of issues related to his business practices, and everything is on the table for his corporate brand. So his office buildings, the hotel that he runs, the residence, all of Trump, that's a huge blow to the brand if they are barred from managing that kind of business moving forward. And it's a big financial blow to him when the judge determines the extent of liability and the remedy, because the judge has already made a determination as to whether or not he's had persistent and pervasive fraud, and the answer to that is already clear. So now we're just dancing around how much and how severe it is.
Yeah.
It's a really big case, and it's even more important that he is on the stand, even though he's not really answering the questions as directly as prosecutors want him to be answering.
I mean, when you bring up that point, I think something that stood out to me just based off of the notes from our reporters in the courtroom right now, there have been points in Trump's testimony, and he said this earlier, where he said that he did think a couple of properties were, quote, very underestimated, including Mar-a-Lago, but he had testified saying that he, quote, just left it be. And you're talking about the responses that he has been giving, to these questions, how it's kind of dancing around, not really actually touching on something. So it's one thing to blame someone else. This is kind of an approach of, I was hands off. What do you make of his response when he says, I left it be?
It's not good enough. He's trying to lay the claim and say, like, well, I thought it was a little over. I thought we should do something about it, but he's not being very specific. And the real issue is, what did you file? What do those documents show? What did you sign? What did you direct? What did you know about? And what did you manufacture? And all of that's going to be proven in the written record. He's just giving the testimony now to try and create a back door. But at the end of these things, and this is something that prosecutors have in their backhand or in the back of their pockets that they always carry with these documents, this could lead to some criminal repercussions because you sign these documents under penalty of perjury. And anytime you fill out these financial declarations involving a bank, which he did have relationships with, there's a signature that says that this information is provided under penalty of perjury. Now, he's added a clause that's saying you can't rely on anything that I've told you, but you can't have it both ways. You can't ask banks to make an evaluation on documents that you provided and then say you can't rely on the documents that we provided. And that's where the fraud comes in. That's where it's been an unfair assessment as to his insurance, an unfair assessment as to the taxes he's paid, an unfair assessment in terms of his insurance that he didn't have enough of because he didn't have the properties valued enough when he undervalued them, and he used the valuations to his benefit. That's already been clear. The amount it's damaged the state of New York is what's at issue, and the penalty for making those damages is what's at stake. And that's what we're dancing around. That's what Donald Trump doesn't want to answer. That's why every question you ask him leads to a speech where he tries to open the door to say, I wasn't sure what was going on. I thought it might have been a little bit high. I thought that was too low. And he's leaving and trying to plant seeds of doubt into what's going to happen in terms of the ultimate evaluation that the judge has to make in terms of the extent of liability and the remedy for the fraud.
You know, I think you touched on this point, but I just want to double down on it because something that he's brought up is disclaimers that were on the financial statements and using that as an argument against, you know, this being his wrongdoing as it's been alleged and found. He was saying that the banks, you know, that they were paid. All of this kind of rhetoric as well. I just want to touch on one other point that he's made throughout his testimony. What do you make of that? Is that also not enough?
It's not enough because that's not the point. And he keeps saying that the banks were paid and they got the loan back. That is not what the standard is. That's like saying I went drinking and I was drunk, but I made it home safely. That's not the issue. The issue is you filled out these fraudulent forms. The banks did not charge you enough, what they should have charged you, because you overvaluated what you had. They should have charged you a higher interest rate. They should have made you take out more insurance, but they didn't because you gave them false information. And that loss is what matters. The bank's loss, the state's loss, not to mention the unintended consequences from other people that could have acquired money but didn't because the bank only has so much to loan out and you had tied up so much of that. All of that is what's really at stake, and it's a false defense of what he's saying. I think his secondary defense of like, I wasn't sure what was going on and they still got their money back. I think the second defense that you're about to hear from him and from his children, this is very clear to me from the testimony that we've been seeing for the past few weeks as well, is that they relied on other people and they weren't really sure. No one is trying to be the last person in the hot potato holding the ball that made decisions. And even that bad door of them saying, that's exactly it. But even that blame, especially as it falls to the lawyers, and he's skilled at that, he has hundreds of lawyers all around doing all sorts of things, is not going to serve him well. This is the argument that we hear from prosecutors, because you can't rely on a lawyer unless all of the information was given to the lawyer, number one, and two, the advice that you relied upon was still reasonable. You can't say later that, hey, my lawyer told me I could rob a bank, so I robbed a bank, and I just relied on his advice. That's not how it works. His signature is on those documents, and so that's why his testimony is so important and why prosecutors are trying to drill down on him to answer the question as to what he knew, when he knew it, and why he signed those documents.
The testimony and the documents. Hey, Attorney Paul Henderson, I got to cut you off here. We got to move forward before our break, but thank you so much for your insight and perspective, because it certainly is a lot to unpack, a lot of narratives that are being thrown out as we, you know, watch into what's happening in this courtroom. Thank you for the context.
Thanks for having me.
The civil fraud trial in New York is just one of the many legal headaches Trump is facing. He's charged with 40 criminal counts for allegedly mishandling classified documents. Federal prosecutors have also indicted him for his alleged efforts at trying to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Georgia officials have indicted him for allegedly trying to overturn the 2020 presidential election there. And the Manhattan DA has filed charges against him related to hush money payments to an adult film star. And Trump has denied all wrongdoing in all of these cases. Now, despite Trump's legal